the unwanted soundtrack to his first trip as Prime Minister. Boris Johnson arrived in Birmingham to meet police officers and promised 20,000 more across England and Wales, but it was protesters that greeted him. This was the image he wanted to project, posing for selfies alongside his new Home Secretary Priti Patel as he walked around an affluent part of the city, a walkabout that lasted just 6 minutes. Increasing police numbers was a leadership pledge that less than 48 hours into office, he's making a priority.
I think it's the most fundamental investment you can make in society. Reducing crime, making our streets safer. Safer streets equals more investment, equals more business, equals jobs, equals growth. It's absolutely crucial for everywhere in this country.
Extra police are welcome, say Labour, but an increase of 20,000 only replaces the 20,000 that have been lost since 2010.
Now, you've been saying that your police force has been one of the worst hit in the country. Well, here we go, 20,000 new police officers. You'll be over the moon.
So we don't live in the parallel universe of Boris Johnson, we live here in the real world, and here we've lost 2,000 police officers, but we've got prisons that are out of control, a probation service that has been cut to shreds, youth services that have been shut down, and the caseload in our mental health services is going up 4 times faster than funding. So it's true, you can't cut crime by cutting police, we've been saying that for years, but we need to rebuild an entire system now, not just rebuild our police force.
This is the new Prime Minister's first big spending pledge, a plan that will cost more than £1 billion.
This is the crux of Prime Minister Johnson's problem. Anything he does, whatever announcement he makes, will be done in the shadow of Brexit.
And today he ruled out a general election before Britain is due to leave the EU.
The British people voted in 2015, in 2016, in 2017. Why on earth? What they want us to do is deliver on their mandate to come out of the EU on October the 31st. They don't want another electoral event. They don't want a referendum. They don't want a general election. They want us to deliver on that mandate.
So, cast iron guarantee, you won't be calling an election.
And before
the October 31st.
We are
Cast iron guarantee.
Absolutely not.
But while an election is ruled out, the chances of a no-deal Brexit increase significantly. During a call with Angela Merkel, he said a deal could only be made once the Irish backstop is abolished. Problems ahead, say Ireland.
He seems to have made a deliberate decision to set Britain on a collision course with the European Union and with Ireland in relation to the Brexit negotiations. And I think only he can answer the question as to why he's doing that.
I want to say to our Irish friends, and what I've said repeatedly, is under no circumstances will the UK be instituting any kind of checks at the frontier in Northern Ireland. Of course not, we don't want that, but the UK will be coming out of the EU on October the 31st, and after we come out, of course, there will be all sorts of discussions to be had with our Irish friends about how to ensure that we have continued frictionless trade, which is what we want.
The French today warned Mr Johnson against playing games and pledged solidarity with Ireland. 2 days into the job, he's wanted a lifetime, and the game of who blinks first has begun.
Paul McNamara reporting there. Well, Mr Johnson has spoken about turbocharging plans for a no-deal Brexit. But in a phone call with the new Prime Minister last night, Wales's First Minister is said to have made it emphatically clear that a no-deal scenario would be catastrophic for the agricultural sector. At this week's Royal Welsh Show, farming unions have been warning about the impact of tariffs on Welsh lamb exports to Europe, despite assurances from Westminster that farmers will get direct support if there's no Brexit deal. Jane Deeth reports from Powys in mid-Wales.
Vinny, come by.
These are the sunlit uplands Boris Johnson wants us to imagine after Brexit. But 1,000 feet up in Powys, Keith Williams doesn't share that sunny optimism. He's worried that with no deal back on the table, the continent could take Welsh lamb off the menu.
Fetch me.
The end of October couldn't be worse timing for farms because it's when many lambs will be ready to go off to be sold. And farms fear that buyers will be put off by the threat of tariffs and lose their appetite for Welsh lamb, driving down prices.
This week, the body which markets Welsh meat said in a no-deal scenario, the price a farmer like Keith gets for a lamb could fall by a quarter.
If we do have tariffs or there is a break that we can't get into Europe, our customers in Europe, if they still want to eat lamb, will eat it from somewhere else. So we've got to then re-win the markets. And worse than that, if there isn't supply from other markets, they change meats. They decide they want to eat chicken or pig or beef. And then it's an even bigger battle because they've gone off lamb.
Will they do that? I mean, everyone tells me, you know, the Europeans will pay for Welsh lamb because it's Welsh lamb.
But they won't pay the tariffs. They're not going to pay that much extra. If the tariffs are going to be up to 50% for red meat, they're not going to pay 50% extra.
Keith Williams' grandfather started farming these hills a century ago, around the time the Royal Welsh Show was born. This year, sheep farmers want to know exactly what the no-deal financial support Boris Johnson promised in the leadership campaign would look like.
The funds are there, the plans are there. We will make sure we look after the farmers and the rural interest.
There's talk of compensation, but when the Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford got Boris Johnson on the phone last night, he warned him no amount of preparation would undo the catastrophic damage he said a no-deal Brexit would do to agriculture. But do sheep farmers here judge no deal a disaster?
We're a small family farm, a hill farm. I got 2 young boys, which is very keen, and we don't know which way we're going with them for the future.
We handle it when it comes and take the good with the bad and hope we survive.
Do you have the same attitude?
Yeah, it is. It's just day to day and take what comes. Like when we put the tups in the autumn, we never know what we're going to sell our lambs for 12 months ahead. It's just a guessing game.
You don't want to be the generation where things could fall through the floor, if that makes sense.
It feels like that.
No, but I'm positive. I'm looking at different markets.
The Farmers Union of Wales says any risk of tariffs is too great.
Margins are already very, very low on products anyway. The average upland farm, without the payment that comes from Europe, makes a loss. People on very low margins who are already have their backs quite firmly to the wall, this could be the final nail.
But one Conservative member of the Welsh Assembly says Boris Johnson might cut it fine to do a deal, but if he can't, there'll be a safety net in place.
So running alongside these negotiations will be the provision for a no-deal scenario. And that no-deal scenario will have to be making sure that there isn't oversupply in the market, because markets might have been closed to us, and ultimately make sure that the government can be buyer of last resort.
So buying up the surplus as opposed to compensating farmers if they can't sell their land?
Well, it's a logical argument that if you have a product that you need to remove that product from the market, but that isn't the government policy at the moment, because the government policy with the new Prime Minister is to secure a favourable deal for Britain and a favourable deal for the European Union so that both can carry on trading.
The UK government admits the alternative could be serious in the short term for farms like these, so it would step in to help. But on these hills, the wait for the Brexit deadline is a nervous one.
Jane Death there. Well, we did ask someone from the Department for Environment to come onto the programme, but no one was available. Joining me now here in the studio, though, is the Director of Brexit at the National Farmers Union, Nick von Westenholz. Thanks very much for coming in. Are you one of the doomsters and the gloomsters the PM is talking about, being too negative about the prospect of no deal?
No, certainly not doomsters or gloomsters. In fact, I mean, we've been working since the referendum with government, with Michael Gove at DEFRA, trying to develop a future agricultural policy that's going to allow farming to thrive in the years ahead. But all that is based on continuing to have access to our largest export market in the EU. So we're just simply pointing out that if you cut that off completely, you cut off that free trade, that is going to have serious economic impacts on farming.
And what would they be? How serious would they be?
Well, I mean, the piece we've just seen where the sheep sector is highlighted is a very important one, with, I think, the second largest sheep producer in the world. Almost half of our sheep production is exported, and nearly all of that goes to the EU. If you suddenly put a nearly 50% tariff on that, you can plainly, I think, imagine what the impacts on prices would be.
I mean, the government is promising what they're calling direct support for farmers in the event of these EU tariffs. What have they said to you about what that direct support might look like?
Well, very little so far. We've, of course, had conversations with government about what sort of mitigations might be needed in the eventuality that there would be no deal. Of course, our response primarily is try and do a deal, because that's the best way of leaving the EU.
But do you accept that no deal is now looking more likely all the time?
I think you have to accept no deal is looking more likely, but the Prime Minister is only a couple of days into his job, and he said very clearly that he wants to leave with a deal. So I think for the time being, we have to give him the benefit of the doubt and work with him, indeed, actually, to get that.
Would financial support solve the problems? Because we heard one of the farmers there worried about if the market itself disappears.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point. Any financial support is going to be temporary by its nature. I think in a no-deal scenario, should it come to that, there would have to be quite significant financial support, which is not necessarily a great use of public funds. But much more importantly than that, if we lose our markets in the EU, those markets we currently have farming benefits from, then it might be very, very difficult in future to get those back, whatever financial support and assistance we've had in the meantime.
I just wonder what you feel about the fact that farmers have been making this point about a no-deal Brexit for a very long time now, and yet it seems that you're constantly effectively being told that you're wrong, don't worry. What do you feel about that? Do you feel you're being listened to?
Well, I think the debate around Brexit has become very political, and it is difficult to land these points, and they are just analytical points. We're not ideological. We're looking at the impact on farm businesses and trying to make a case around that.
But are they hearing?
I hope people are hearing. And as I said again, this is actually not about trying not to leave the EU. This is about leaving in an orderly fashion where we can build a more productive future for farming in the UK.